Just take that in for a second. That is a real quote, supposedly from a man who was running the most powerful empire on the planet. I mean, it's a line so monstrous, it sounds like something a supervillain would say in a comic book movie, right? Nope, that was a Roman emperor. And believe it or not, he was just one member of a, well, let's call it a very interesting family.
So yeah, welcome to the world of the Julio-Claudians, the very first dynasty of Roman Caesars. We're about to dive into their story, and you've probably heard the names: Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and of course, Nero. It's a story that has everything: massive, world-changing peace, but also some of the most mind-blowing ambition and just truly shocking behavior you can imagine.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? When you hear these stories about them, a lot of them just sound too wild to be true. So think of this less like a lecture and more like a historical detective story. We're going to dig into the evidence together and try to figure out what was really going on. Were these guys just born evil, or is there a bigger picture we're missing?
Okay, so first things first, let's look at the rap sheet, because the stories that have come down to us are, honestly, they're insane. I mean, seriously, these guys are basically the original prestige TV villains. Think Game of Thrones, but real.
And look, this isn't stuff people made up hundreds of years later. These accounts come straight from Roman historians, guys like Tacitus and Suetonius. You've got everything: paranoid rulers, scheming mothers, poison plots, backstabbing, the works. It honestly reads more like a screenplay than a history book, so you gotta ask yourself, how did Rome, this great civilization built on law and order, end up being run by these people?
Well, to really get a handle on these emperors, we can't just look at them. We have to look at what came before them. The key isn't really in their individual psychology. It's in the absolute bloodbath that was the end of the Roman Republic.
Okay, so for about 500 years, Rome was a republic. On paper, it was all about these amazing ideals, right? Freedom, liberty, something they called virtus, this idea of manly virtue. But by the end, whew, boy, the reality was a complete nightmare. We're talking about a century of non-stop civil war. Roman legions weren't fighting foreigners anymore. They were fighting other Roman legions. They were literally using the bodies of their fellow citizens to build defenses. All that skill for warfare that won them an empire, they turned it on themselves. The whole ideal just imploded.
And it's out of that total chaos that one man, Augustus, comes forward with a deal, a kind of bargain for the entire Roman world. He basically said, listen, give up some of that chaotic freedom you're all fighting over, and in return, I will give you peace and stability. And you can imagine, after decades of watching your neighbors slaughter each other, that was a pretty tempting offer. People were just exhausted. They wanted things to be normal again. And you know what? Augustus delivered.
But here's the tricky part. To make this deal stick, Augustus had to create a brand new job title for himself. He absolutely could not call himself a king. Romans had a deep historical hatred of kings. That was a non-starter. So he had to invent something new. He had to become an actor. He had to put on a performance.
This quote from one of his advisors just nails it. It perfectly sums up the new reality for the guy in charge. You have to imagine, the emperor was never not on stage. He was being watched 24/7. Every single thing he did, every word he said, it was all part of this massive, ongoing play for a global audience.
And the craziest part, Augustus knew it better than anyone. I mean, get this. As he was dying, he reportedly turned to his friends and asked if he'd played his part well in the comedy of life. This tells you everything. For him, it wasn't just about having power. It was a role he had to live and breathe every single day for more than 40 years.
But you can probably guess, not everyone bought the performance. Historians who came later, especially Tacitus, they looked back on all this and just saw one big lie: total hypocrisy. From their point of view, every time an emperor said he was doing something for the good of the people, it was just an act. It was pretty language to cover up the ugly truth. One man had all the power.
And this tightrope walk was Augustus's political genius. He never called himself king or dictator. He took the title princeps, which basically means for citizen. And it was absolutely brilliant, because it created this perfect illusion. It let everyone pretend the republic was still around, that he was just the most important guy, a public servant. But behind the scenes, he held all the cards. He'd figured out how to be a king without ever calling himself one.
Okay, but this brilliant solution created a huge new problem. See, Augustus was one of a kind, a true political genius who could pull off this incredible act. So What happens when you have to hand over this impossible job, with all its unlimited power, to someone who isn't a genius? What happens when you give it to his family?
And what happens next is this fascinating and frankly terrifying breakdown over generations. You have Augustus, the architect who builds the whole thing. He's followed by Tiberius, who absolutely hated the public performance part and just became this bitter, paranoid hermit. After him, you get Caligula, who went in the opposite direction. He loved the absolute power and went completely off the rails with it. Then there's Claudius, who kind of survived it all by pretending to be an idiot, only to become emperor himself. And it all culminates in Nero, a guy who didn't really want to be an emperor. He wanted to be a rock star.
So you see, the system Augustus built, it was basically a trap. You're putting limitless, undefined power into the hands of one single person. That's a recipe for paranoia, for cruelty, for disaster. As one Roman writer famously said, the peace of the entire world was hanging by the slender thread of one man's mental health. The takeaway here is crucial. This system didn't just happen to find monsters to put in charge. In a way, it was designed to create them.
Okay, so where does that leave us? We've seen the crime scenes, we've looked at the dysfunctional family at the center of it all, but here's where we throw in a final, massive twist. What if the stories themselves, the very evidence we've been looking at, can't be trusted?
This is the bombshell. Our #1 source for all this juicy gossip, the historian Tacitus, he tells you this himself right up front. He basically says, look, the histories written when these guys were alive were fake because everyone was too scared to tell the truth. And the histories written after they died were just as biased because they were fueled by still festering hatreds. Think about that. There is no neutral source. We are reading history that the author admits is biased. So are we getting the real story? Or are we just reading political hit pieces written long after the fact?
So this is the final tally, the ultimate trade-off. In one column, you have the incredible success of the Augustan peace, the famous Pax Romana. 2 centuries of relative stability, booming trade, incredible construction projects. Life got better for millions of people. But in the other column, you have the price tag for that peace, a system of absolute power that festered at the top, leading to paranoia, murder, and total chaos in the imperial family.
And that leads us with the big, uncomfortable question. How much of this stuff is true and how much is just politically motivated slander? And, maybe more importantly, even if every single horrible story is true, was it worth it? Was the moral rot at the very top a price worth paying for peace and stability for the rest of the empire? That's the fundamental, unsettling bargain of the first Roman emperors, and it's a question that honestly is still worth thinking about.